On April 18, 2010, a man lay dying on a sidewalk in Queens, New York. His name was Hugo Alfredo Tail Yax. He was 31 years old, a Guatemalan immigrant, homeless but not invisible. An hour earlier, he had saved a woman from a mugger. The mugger turned on him, stabbed him, and ran. Hugo collapsed on the pavement. Over the next 90 minutes, security cameras recorded 25 people walking past. Some stopped, looked at him, walked on. One man shook him, then walked on. Two men took photos on their phones, then walked on. One woman stopped, stared, made a phone call, then walked on. Nobody called 911. Hugo died on that sidewalk. He had just saved someone's life. Now here is the question I need you to sit with. Those 25 people were not monsters. They were not criminals. Most of them were probably good people, the kind who would tell you they'd always help someone in need. So what happened? When we hear a story like Hugo's, we ask the same question. How could nobody help? It sounds like a question about morality. It isn't. It's a question about math. Because here is what the research tells us. If Hugo had collapsed in front of one person, just one, the probability of that person calling for help was over 85%. In front of 25 people, it dropped to under 30%. More witnesses, less help. This is the bystander effect, and it is one of the most counterintuitive, most dangerous, most thoroughly documented phenomena in all of psychology. It was first identified not by a philosopher or an ethicist, but by two researchers who were horrified by a murder. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was stabbed to death outside her apartment building in New York. The New York Times reported that 38 neighbors had witnessed the attack. None called the police. The story shook the country. Editorials called it a moral collapse, a symptom of urban alienation. People pointed at the city, at society, at culture. Psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané at Columbia University refused to accept that explanation. They asked themselves a question no one had asked before. Not, what kind of people don't help? But, what kind of situation makes helping less likely? Their answer changed everything we thought we knew about human nature. Darley and Latané ran a simple experiment. They told participants they were joining a discussion about college life over an intercom, anonymously. During the conversation, one participant appeared to have a seizure, started stuttering, said he might be dying, then went silent. When subjects believed they were the only one on the call, 95% got up immediately to get help. When they believed 5 others were also listening, only 31% helped, and they waited an average of 3 minutes before doing anything. 3 minutes. That is an eternity in a medical emergency. Same emergency, same person, different number of witnesses, completely different response. They called it diffusion of responsibility. In a crowd, the sense of personal obligation doesn't multiply, it divides. Each person thinks someone else will handle it. Someone else already called. Someone else knows better. I'm probably overreacting. Surely someone more qualified is already on it. And so everyone waits, and no one acts. The cruelest part of diffusion of responsibility is that it feels like reasonableness. It doesn't feel like cowardice. It feels like common sense. That is why it is so dangerous. But diffusion of responsibility is only half the mechanism. The second half is even more disturbing. In an emergency, humans do something almost no one admits. We look at the people around us to figure out how serious the situation is. Psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance. In practice, it works like this. You see someone collapse on the street. You're not sure if it's serious. You look around. Everyone else looks calm, uncertain, waiting. So you conclude, it must not be that bad. But here is the trap. Every single person around you is doing the exact same thing. Looking at you, reading your calm expression, concluding the same thing. A crowd of 25 people, every one of them secretly alarmed, every one of them reading the others as calm, and collectively deciding nothing needs to be done. It is a social feedback loop with potentially fatal consequences. Psychologist Solomon Asch proved in 1951 that people will deny the evidence of their own eyes if everyone around them sees something different. He showed participants two lines. One was obviously longer. But when actors in the room unanimously called the shorter one longer, 75% of real participants agreed with them, at least once, against their own perception. We do not trust our own eyes as much as we trust the group. And this is not a flaw unique to weak or cowardly people. It happens to everyone. The smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing why the group must be right and you must be wrong. The more uncertain the situation, the more we rely on the crowd to define reality. Now add one variable, a smartphone. In 2021, on a commuter train in Philadelphia, a woman was attacked for 40 minutes. Other passengers were in the car. Some watched, some looked away. Several took out their phones, not to call for help, to film. When police later reviewed the footage, an officer said publicly, "There were people on that train who should have intervened, or at minimum, called 911. None had. Researchers who study digital behavior have identified what they call the observer effect amplified by media, when the act of recording becomes a substitute for action. Filming creates psychological distance. You are no longer a witness to an event. You are a documentarian. You are doing something. The phone becomes a reason not to intervene, a socially acceptable exit from moral responsibility. And on social media, the bystander effect scales to millions. Every day, videos of people in distress circulate online. Millions watch, millions share. Almost none report, almost none act. The platform becomes the crowd. The algorithm becomes the authority. And diffusion of responsibility spreads across an audience of 50 million people who each assume someone else has already done something. Now expand this further. Past one person on a sidewalk, past one train, past one viral video. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram at Yale University ran the most controversial experiment in the history of psychology. Ordinary people, teachers, office workers, retirees, were told they were participating in a study on memory and learning. Their role, to administer electric shocks to a stranger every time he gave a wrong answer. The shocks were fake. The stranger was an actor, but the participants didn't know that. As the shocks escalated, the actor screamed, begged them to stop, complained of a heart condition, then went silent. 65% of participants administered the maximum shock level. 450 volts, labeled on the machine XXX danger. They weren't sadists. Milgram interviewed them afterward. Most were visibly distressed, sweating, trembling. Many said they wanted to stop. But they didn't, because a man in a white coat told them to continue, and they had transferred their moral responsibility to the authority in the room. Milgram wrote, "Ordinary people, simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part, can become agents in a terrible destructive process." Hannah Arendt, philosopher and Holocaust researcher, watched the trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1961. Eichmann had organized the logistics of the Holocaust, the transportation, the scheduling, the paperwork. He was expected to be a monster. He was a bureaucrat, a man who said he was just following orders, just doing his job, just one person in a chain where everyone assumed someone else had made the decision. She called it the banality of evil. Evil that doesn't look like evil. Evil that looks like administration. Evil that is enabled step by step by ordinary people who never once said yes to murder, just never once said no. Here is what the research consistently finds about the people who do act. It is not that they are braver. It is not that they feel less fear. It is not that they have a stronger moral code. The single most consistent predictor of intervention in an emergency is this: they had thought about it before it happened. People who break the bystander effect are almost always people who had, at some earlier point, asked themselves, what would I do in that situation? That's it. Not training, not personality, not courage. Dr. Samuel Oliner, sociologist at Humboldt State University, spent decades interviewing people who rescued Jews during the Holocaust, people who risked their lives when everyone around them did nothing. The most common thing they said was not that they were brave. It was that for them, doing nothing was simply not an option they had considered. They had already made the decision. Long before the moment arrived, the act of mentally rehearsing a moment of moral choice makes you dramatically more likely to act when that moment arrives. The people who don't freeze are the ones who aren't deciding for the first time. So, what do you actually do? Because you will be in this situation, not necessarily with a dying man on a pavement, but in a meeting where something wrong goes unchallenged, in a group chat where someone gets humiliated, in a comment section where a pile-on is happening, in a room where an accusation gets quietly dismissed. The research on breaking the bystander effect is consistent. Step 1. Name the emergency out loud. This person needs help. Saying it, even quietly, breaks the social trance. It gives others permission to stop performing calm. Step 2. Pick one person, not the crowd. You, in the red jacket, call 911. The moment responsibility is assigned to a specific individual, diffusion collapses. Step 3. Go first. The fastest way to change what a crowd believes is normal is to act as if acting is normal. One person kneeling next to someone in distress doubles the probability that others will follow. Step 4. Accept that you will feel foolish. The fear of overreacting keeps more people passive than the fear of danger. You are allowed to be wrong about the severity. You are not allowed to outsource that judgment to a crowd that is outsourcing it back to you. Step 5. Make the decision now. Before you're in the situation, decide who you want to be in that moment while you still have the luxury of thinking clearly. Hugo Tail-Yaks died saving someone else's life. He didn't die because New York is cruel. He died because 25 people each decided, individually, that someone else would handle it. The bystander effect isn't a story about bad people. It's a story about a system, a social reflex, that turns good people into silent witnesses. And the only way to break a reflex is to know it exists. Now you do. The next time you're in a crowd and something feels wrong, and everyone around you looks calm, remember, they're looking at you for the same reason.